Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George, and I'm a little overdressed. Just got back from somewhere. It's okay, we got a cool thing for you today. We're starting on this guy, the Tau Starpulse Cadre. The first kit I'm going to pick is the Fire Warriors. Basic troop choice, I'm going to establish the painting scheme that I want to use for my entire Tau collection. Some of it worked, some of it didn't work as well, but I learned a lot, and it's going to get better from here on out. Let's take a look. I have been looking forward to painting these guys for a couple of days now, maybe even longer, maybe about a month. I had this flash of inspiration for the color scheme. I knew that I was going to paint them, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with them. And I'm still not really sure that the paint scheme I've selected for them is canonical or like game appropriate, but my understanding is that it really doesn't matter what they are. Like, it doesn't, like, it's not like a certain faction of the Tau have a certain color uniform. Apparently the uniform color depends on their area of operation or the theater of operation. So that means that we have some freedom of choice here, which is cool because my inspiration came from the weirdest place. So I recently bought a new car, and I'm not like really into cars. It's just, you know, a way to get it from point A to point B. And so I was driving around, and my interior has this like dark gray charcoaly feel, but it's got this vivid blue stripe going over a lot of the details, like on the dashboard and even the stitching on the seats. And I thought, oh, this would be really cool for my Tau. So that's what I want to do with these guys. And I'm hoping it looks kind of cool. And this will be the third army I attempt, and I've learned a few things from painting the previous two armies. And so I'm going to start this off kind of with full knowledge of my pitfalls and also kind of how to be more efficient and stuff like that. So I have gone ahead and applied a base coat of uniform gray. I'm sorry, not a base coat, a prime. I used uniform gray from the Army Painter line. And I'm going to start applying the base coat to over the prime. It's going to be the same color. There's a very near match for these. So I've got a little bit of uniform gray. But I've made it a glaze, so the glaze is going to go over every bit of the uniform because I don't really know yet what pieces I'm going to pick out to be a different color than the gray. So it's all going to get some gray, and then I'll pick out what details I want to make different. And so I apply this glaze. It's just, it's essentially the same color as the primer. I technically don't have to do this, but I'd like to do it because it gives me the opportunity to fix any mistakes that I make, and I make plenty. So this way I can always cover it over with the glaze as opposed to attempting to match the primer color. So you can probably tell it's pretty thick. I mean, not pretty thick. It's pretty thin, but it's kind of watery, and that's okay. I'm going to let this dry. But that's not the gray that these dudes or dudettes, I'm not sure about, females in the Tau military. I don't have the codex. And Tau didn't come out until a little bit after I stopped playing Warhammer 40K. About 20 years ago. So this is actually my first experience with Tau, and I know very little about them other than they're shooty and maybe they're fish people, and apparently they save for the greater good all the time. But I was really excited when I got the Starpulse Cadre box. And now that I'm confident I can meet my internal challenge of painting that Starpulse Cadre before the end of the year, so before I get my next holiday box, I'm pretty excited about the whole project, and I think it's going to go pretty well. So like I said, this gray is not going to be the final color. Once I base coat all the models, I will apply some dark tone, and that'll darken up the model nicely. So this, kind of it's a medium gray. I have ash gray, which is a little lighter, and I have another gray, which is a little darker. I think it's Necromancer Flesh or Robes or something like that. By using a wash over this glaze, I'm going to get that darker gray that I'm going for without too much trouble. So I've got the base layer, that glaze. I've got that all on all the parts of the model that I have set up so far. You'll notice that these guys don't have that big old shoulder pad yet. I'm going to paint that separately, like once the main model is done. And so I'm at the point where I have to decide on what part of the model is going to be what color. So I know that I want gray to be my primary color. In fact, I want that dark gray to be most of the model. The secondary color is going to be this, not bright, like a bright dark blue, but I don't want it everywhere. I want it in certain, almost as an accent color. And so looking at the model, the original plan was to, do the dark gray for the kind of the fabric underneath the armor plates, and then use the secondary color for the armor plates. But there are a lot of armor plates. If I do that, then this model is going to be primarily blue, or at least 50-50 blue, which really wasn't what I was going for. I wanted it to be mostly gray, with a splash of blue here and there that'll be nice and bright and vivid. So what I think I'm going to have to do, well, because I can't even invert it, right? Like if I make the pants blue and the armor gray, I feel like there's still probably a lot of pants. But maybe that's the way to go. Otherwise, I would have to do something like the entire thing is gray, so both the plates and the tunic, and then use the blue in spots like the helmet or maybe that little circle thing and the shoulder pad, which might still be the way I'm going to go. So I'm having trouble deciding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the piece that I know I'm going to do. So I know that I need to add a nice dark wash. As a matter of fact, I'm going to thin this down with a little bit of water, and because I want it to be dark, but I don't want it to be extra thick. I want it to go into the recesses, but I don't want it to be like all over the place. I don't know. I'm going to water it down and see what this looks like. But my pipette's out of water, so let me grab some water. So that's what it looks like with just the one layer of the wash. I think that looks okay. I'm going to let them dry. I usually do this once all of the base paint is on. But in this case, I'm not exactly sure where the base paint is going to go. So I figure if I do it this way, I can always go over, paint over any already washed parts that I want to paint a different color, while I kind of decide what I want these troops to look like. You know, I had this very clear idea in my head of what it would look like, but now that I'm looking at the model, it's not as clear cut. So it's one of those cases where I'm going to decide kind of on the fly as my eye starts seeing what the model actually looks like as opposed to what I thought it was going to look like, if that makes any sense. So here's where these guys stand now that the wash, the dark tone wash, that was a little watered down. Now that it's dried, here's what they look like, and I kind of dig it, but I want more. I want the gray to be a little darker than this. So I'm going to apply a second coat of basically the same wash, but I've diluted it a little less, so there's a little less water, because I want this gray to be kind of dark, and I do want the kind of the little crevices, the little lines there, I want those to be a little more pronounced than they are right now. So I try to avoid doing a second coat of the wash if I can help it. But in this case, I think it's going to help the models quite a bit. Let's see if I'm right. So here's what they look like with the second application. This hasn't dried, but I'm kind of doing them in a batch. One of the things that you probably want to be careful about is how this wash is pooling. So if you take a look at these guys, they're drying, and I used a liberal amount of this wash. And since I'm drying them in this position, the gravity is going to try to pull that liquid down quite a bit. So you'll see that it's pooling there at the feet, and if I let that stay, it's going to look kind of gross and sloppy. So as it's drying, I'm dabbing the wash, that pooled wash. I'm just dabbing it off. But I'm doing it strategically. Like, I'm not doing it everywhere. I'm just doing it in places where I really don't want it to pool as much. There we go. Because I still want it to pool. I still want a nice dark gray, but I want to control where it pools. And so every time I dab a little bit off, I'll wipe it off on my rag that I use to dry my brushes, so that it comes off and stays off. So that's a little tip. I mean, I kind of knew about it, but I didn't apply it consistently. And I don't know if you're familiar with Eons of Battle. It's a YouTube Warhammer 40K channel that focuses on you know, kind of higher level painting and giving you ideas on the hobby. It's a funny group of guys, well, a group of guys. It's two dudes, Nick and Jay, and these past couple of months, I've kind of been incorporating myself into their community, because those guys they're really cool, and they're funny, they're irreverent, but they're also really nice. Like, there's no mean-spirited bone in them, really, which is unusual for the 40K community, and really any kind of fandom. A big part of the fandom is to just hate on the thing that brings us together. There is no shortage of Warhammer 40K or Games Workshop is the worst company ever. They hate their fans, yada yada yada. And this channel is not at all like that. They leave the hate at the door. Certainly they'll acknowledge it, and you know, nobody has universally positive things to say about any corporation, including Games Workshop. But it's a nice mix of acknowledging the missteps without delving into just this is the worst company in the world, because it's not. There's plenty of worse companies. And anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I recently got a little bit of feedback as part of their Patreon service that they provide their community. They'll take a look at your models and give you some positive some constructive feedback about your painting technique, your color selection. Basically, you can say, "Hey, look, here's the model. Here's the models I finished, and I have this specific question about how I could do better," or they'll just kind of freehand it, whichever way you go. And so they gave me this tip for keeping my washes from pooling in ugly, gross ways. And like I said, I knew about it already, but I didn't always execute. And so having them pointed out really hammered that in for me. So I'm being more careful about how I use my washes. I mean, I still use them very liberally because it's a great way of being a lazy painter and still getting decent results. But it's also, it has some drawbacks. So I try to leverage as many of the benefits while leaving as many of the drawbacks on the table for somebody else to deal with. So that's kind of how I'm approaching this. After all, we are trying to get better at this, right? That's why we watch all these YouTube videos. So this is where we're at with our Tau Fire Warriors. And so I've got the arms, and so I went with the black gun, and the arms themselves are pretty heavily washed, and so you can see a lot of those little details. I'm not going to have to go in there and do a ton of stuff to those parts. There is a thing I'm going to do, but I'm not quite ready for that yet. The guns, I went with a black. I mean, it's a tough color, but I'm going to try black just to see. I kind of like the idea of having them have black guns. I want to try to avoid metals, not at all costs, but mostly I want these guys to be like kitted out with composites, like a heavy-duty plastic armor, and so their guns are going to be the same way. I might use some metallic details, like there's that little ball right there, which is a design element that kind of keeps coming up, I think. I've seen those little balls there before. So maybe that'll be metallic. I'm not entirely sure yet. But I want to limit my use of metallics for these Tau, just because. Really, I don't know. It's a design aesthetic. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with so the pistol is fine, right? This is for that sergeant or whatever they're called in Tau language. But there's that little communicator, radar, scope thing, whatever. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do there. Those are kind of accent colors that I haven't really decided on yet. I'm basically letting the colors come to me, if that makes any sense. Like as I paint the model, when I run across something that I haven't decided on yet, I'll kind of decide on the spot given what the model looks like. And so here is what my actual trooper looks like, and it's mostly what I wanted, except I'm not sure, it might be too monolithically gray, but I have an idea for that anyway. So the idea here is to kind of overbrush on some of these kind of armor panels. I'm going to overbrush a gray to kind of make it a little cleaner. And I'm going to use overbrushing because I don't want to get inside the crevices. So overbrushing, dry brushing, whatever you want to call it. Now that's more work than I'm typically willing to do for troops, or really almost anything that I paint, but I think it's going to look cool, so I'm going to give it a shot here. But the more important piece that I So I attempted this blue, right? So I had mentioned that I had inspiration from the new car that I bought. I know it's a weird thing to say, but this isn't quite what I had in mind. The blue is a little deeper, and this actually already has some blue tone over it. It's a little deeper than I wanted. I wanted something a little more vibrant, a little more glowy almost, and this just isn't it. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go over it with a different color blue. So the blue that you see now is this stuff, deep blue, and should be no surprise, it's pretty deep. So I want to try a different blue. Which blue to use? Well, really it's between these two, right? There's the ultramarine blue, which might be pretty vibrant. There's this one, which I typically use for plasma weapons, and I think I'm leaning towards this one, just because I think this one will still be pretty dark. And so yeah, I'm gonna go with this electric blue, mostly because I like the way it pairs up with the blue tone to give a nice glowy kind of an effect. Now I'm not really wanting to go glowy with these guys, but I do want a vibrant blue that's deepened kind of selectively by the wash. So I'm going to repaint these guys, at least the parts that are blue, and that's okay. So that's what it looks like with the freshly painted electric blue. I think it's going to look pretty decent, but we're going to wait for it to dry, and I'm going to do the very same thing to the rest of these troops in the hopes that I get a blue that I'm happy with. I should point out I am using a glaze as per usual, so I might have to do this a couple of times. Okay, they're all repainted. Now I'm going to hit them with the blue tone, and I hope that this does what I had in my head. This right here, this is the blue I was going for. I mean, it isn't exactly a match to what I had in my head. The one in my head had just a hint of purple, but this works. This will totally work. I mean, I could even create a wash with purple to maybe give it an extra tint, but I don't know. I don't know. I think this is right kind of where I wanted. I mean, I could add an extra layer of red tint over it, like maybe water it down, but I don't know. I might have to play around with it. But this is basically what I had in mind. And so they're ready for this next step. And this next step is where I kind of clean up the armor a bit. I mean, it's pretty messy. And when I think about the Tau, I don't really think of messy, really. I think of clean composites. So I'm going to try and do some overbrushing, some dry brushing, I guess, of these raised areas. I don't know how well it's going to work. Yeah, so most of what I accomplished here is I've managed to cover up the recesses, those little lines there, and I'm not sure I like that so much. Let me try a couple more and see what this buys me. Well, I don't think I'm going to get what I was looking for. I think what I'm going to have to do is either go a lighter shade of gray and then darken that up. I'm sorry, a lighter shade of gray is what I meant to say, and then go over that with some with some wash or something like that, because this is not, there's not enough difference to justify all the extra work. So I'm going to try ash gray, which is a shade lighter than the uniform gray I have been using for this. I don't know if that'll work, but I'm going to give it a shot. So that doesn't look so bad, and I think that when I go over it with some of the wash, it'll show up as two different shades of gray, and that's really what I'm going for. So I'm going to keep working with this particular gray color, and since I'm no longer going to use it as a dry brush, it isn't working. Like it's still getting in to those little crevices that I wanted to keep it out of. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint it with my usual thin paint / glaze, so as to not obscure any of these apparently really fine details. But this means I'm back to a place where I didn't really want to be, where I was kind of picking out the different armor panels, because it's going to be a lot of work every time I do this with Tau. But maybe it's time I stop being as lazy as I have been. That might not be a bad idea. You know, time to grow as a painter. And part of that is to tackle more complicated challenges. And this is going to be one of those, I think. Because generally speaking, I like the way it looks. So it might be worth the extra effort. Now, if you're after tabletop ready, quick and easy, you know, I'd say just keep them the same color. For me, I'm going to take the extra step, but not something you have to do for sure. All right, here are my Tau dudes. They've all got their new coat of ash gray on the armor panels, and so now I'm going to give them a bit of a wash, just those panels, and I've mixed up some dark tone, but I've diluted it a bit with a couple drops of water, a couple drops of quick wash medium. The idea here is that I want to tone down the darkness but retain the properties of the wash so that it sinks in to whatever crevices we have available. I'm hoping that's going to do the trick. So it should be a very subtle darkness in the crevices and only there. I mean, it's going to darken up the gray a little bit too, but not as much as just using the dark tone by itself. That's the plan. For the guns, I'm going to try something I haven't tried before, and that's to give the gun a bit of a gray wash. The idea here is that I want all those little lines to show up as gray on the gun, all those little details on there, but I don't want to pick them out individually. So I've mixed up a little bit of gray, and that is actually way too much gray. Okay, so that's probably a little better. I'm going to need to dilute my gray mixture quite a bit more to get that effect. And I think I'm just going to dilute it on the fly. because when I put it on, it looks like that, and that's not at all what I want. So I get some of the brush cleaning water, and I just dilute the crap out of this to get me a much thinner wash. And by careful removing of what I've already added, I can make sure that the wash kind of lands in the crevices. And then I'll go in and with a drier brush, I'll kind of wipe off the excess. So that the gun remains mostly black, but there's a little bit of gray in those crevices. It's a bit of a delicate operation, and it requires a lot of judgment, but I think it's going to look all right. So I'm working on the shoulder pads, and so I've got the primary color on there, and I'm sorry, it's the secondary color, and I've even got the blue wash on there so it matches up with the blue of the models. But I hadn't realized how long this takes. You basically have to paint the front, the visible side, and let that all dry, and then you kind of have to do the underside as well because it's pretty oversized, and I suspect there's going to be parts of this that are going to be visible even once it's glued to the model. So it's it's another kind of step that I didn't anticipate. So it's this painting project is still taking a little longer than I expected. And there's even this little detail here. When you do the inside of this pauldron, which I'm not complaining, it's a really neat looking piece. I'm also kind of doing the outline of the interior so that it looks like it's painted on the outside and it captures the edges as well. So there's a lot of steps, and I haven't even started with all the accoutrement that go on like the pistol holsters and the other stuff that goes under the pouches. So it's taking a little bit to paint, and I've started working on, so this kit comes with some accessories like this, I think these are shield drones. I've got 2 of those. I've magnetized them a little bit so that I don't have to use a flying stance that they normally come with. So I can use these, put them on the base, and so I can remove them as needed. So that took another little bit. And then there's this guy, which is like a support weapons platform, which is really cool. But it also is going to require painting. And so I'm going to paint this in 2 pieces, just like the drones, because I want to make sure that this is primed and that some of those details are showing up because it's exposed, and so you'll be able to see it. So you have to make sure that the interior is painted as well. So same thing here. I haven't glued these down because I do want to paint that up so that you can see the details in there. It would be a shame to not attend to that. There's a lot of stuff happening in there, and I think it's going to look really cool. So it's taking a little bit, but I'm getting closer. Once these pauldrons are done, I'll glue them onto the model, and then I'll move to I'll paint the accessories, but then I'll also start working on some details. I mounted the arms on these models because I was kind of at that phase where I'm like, all right, let's just get this done. And I probably shouldn't have, so it's not as evident here, but that faceplate I'm going to have to paint, and that won't be a problem here. But I posed a lot of my models like this, so that the Tau, they're kind of doing the shoulder brace and they're just aiming down sight. They probably don't need to aim down sight, since I'm guessing this helmet has some kind of optical targeting, something or the other. But I thought it was a cool pose, but that means that getting into that little faceplate is going to be a little trickier. So probably should have waited a little bit. But it's fine. It's fine. We're getting there. We're getting there. Alright, here are my dudes with their big old pauldrons attached. I think they look pretty cool. I'm digging the blue. Not sure about the other details, but I'm going to leave it there for now. Well, not the details, but like the other kind of primary and secondary, the primary colors, basically, the grays is what I'm saying. I'm not sure I'm digging it, but I'm going to leave that as it is. I'll probably try a second batch of these to see if I like that next batch better. I have a couple of ideas on how to improve this process now that I have a good idea of what colors I want to use. So there's that. And before I start detailing these guys, and there's not a ton of detailing I'm going to do, I'm going to paint up that little Tau icon. I'm going to hit the eyepiece. I'll probably add some lighting indicators on the backpack. Maybe something here on the gun, for sure, that little circle thing. And other than that, there's not a ton. Maybe a little light here on this gauntlet. So there's not a ton of details that I want to pick out on these models specifically, but there are some that I want to pick out. The place where a lot of the detail for these guys is going to come from are right here. These are those little pouches that you can glue on to your models kind of really wherever. But I've learned since working on the Imperial Guard, my last couple of projects, I've learned that if you do these separately, you get it's a much nicer experience. It's easier to paint. It's a little longer process, but it's longer because you're spending more time on these pieces, and that means you just can't gloss over it the way I'm usually tempted to do. And I've picked out a couple of different colors, basically for all the equipment stuff that would normally be metallic, like on Imperial Guard. I've gone with just black. So the grenades, the weapon magazines, since the weapon itself is all black, then I'm going to make sure that the magazines are also all black. But I've used a glaze so that some of those details can still come out, so it's not just monolithically black. And I did use some oak brown. It's one of my darkest brown colors to pick out those pouches. I figured these guys still use livestock. I thought I saw something about them having like live mounts of some sort, like beasts of burden that they ride, but they also ally with like the Crutox. So I figured agriculture, animal husbandry, that's still things that these guys practice. Even though they're super advanced and futuristic, they still probably rely on materials from like animal hides and leathers. So I'm gonna go over these with a little bit of wash, and I'm using flesh wash here as opposed to like the soft tone. I do want a little bit of red here, and I think that's going to look okay on these, especially because there's not a ton. It's just a tiny little detail. A little bit of color is going to be a nice addition to these models that are otherwise pretty bland, by design, but still kind of visually uniform. So I'm going to spice things up with the slight red tinge that's in the flesh wash. Once these dry, I'm going to glue them onto the models, and we'll be even further along in this project. It's coming to a close, I'm excited to say. So I haven't talked a bunch about the additional units that are included in this kit. So there was 2 drones that I've elected to make shield drones, just because I about all I know about the Tau is that they're squishy, and so I thought maybe that might benefit from some shield drones. There's one with some extra guns, one that offers an invulnerable save. I thought maybe, with my limited understanding of Tau tactics and whatever, I thought this would probably be handy, and I figured, you know, if I change my mind later, I can get a batch of these and make them however I want. The thought crossed my mind, I could magnetize these, but it seems like more trouble than it's worth. A lot more trouble than it's worth. Maybe as I play with these a little bit more, I'll have a better understanding of how I could pull this off. But I did do something a little different. Instead of using the flight stands that are included in the kit, I went with these. These are magnetized flight stands, and I think I used this incorrectly. I'm pretty sure, so it's a, here, let me show you. There's a ball and socket kind of design to these. And so the ball is steel, and there's this magnet with this divot inside it. It's basically a ring, and you use it this way. And so that way you can kind of move the ball around in any orientation. It's neat. I wasn't really interested in posing this thing, although it is a neat side effect. My main interest was in not using the typical flight stand with that little stick that goes in here. I have some flight stands from before that did not survive very long. They break really quickly, so I'm using this for anything that flies, or a version of this. I got these at the Magnet Baron. They come in various sizes, so just make sure you know what you're getting. I have another kit that the flight stands are really, really short. I don't know if I'll be able to get away with using those in any game, but that's fine. I also put these on a 32 millimeter base. I don't know what size they were supposed to be on, but I thought that maybe the 27 millimeter bases that the Tau go on, I thought those were a little too small, so I went with one of these. I hope that's fine. So I have both of these. Oh. Here we go. So, I've also got this guy, which is that support platform. It's got what I think is a smart missile system. There was another pod you could have used. That was the rocket pod. I figured those were unguided, so I thought maybe the guided ones would be better to use. And so I've put this on a 40 millimeter base. I don't know if that was the idea, but they were way too small for even the 32 millimeter base. Now, in painting these, I'm going to replicate the scheme I have here, where most of this is going to be gray. Maybe I'll have two different shades of gray, but I'll have a touch of blue, probably on the weapon pod, maybe this thing, maybe the legs. I'm not entirely sure. Same thing with these drones. They'll be mostly gray and with some blue details on it. But what I wanted to show you was I took so you'll notice how when these are actually assembled like this, one of the design elements I think is really, really neat is you can see inside it, like it deploys, it pops out of this thing, out of this body. I think that's a really neat touch, and there's a couple of things you could do with that. Right now I'm going to go with a simple approach. So I've painted these separately. Before I glue these on, I want to make sure that this is painted up on the inside, then I can go on the outside and paint them up. And so the drones have a very similar design aesthetic, where they're kind of, there's like the machinery or like stuff inside it that you want to kind of show up. So the way I'm going to do this is I've painted it all with a black glaze, and I could probably stop there, but I am not. I am going to attempt a dry brush of light gray. So over all that black stuff, I'm going to go in and hit it with some light gray, dry brush style. The idea is to kind of enhance the lines so that anyone taking a peek inside the machinery will have something interesting to look at. going to be really easy to mess this up, and I'm already kind of doing that. But that's okay. This is not like a major feature, but it is something I thought was neat that would benefit from a little something other than just bam, black. I could have also done this other thing. I could have painted this white and added blue tone to replicate that plasma glow I seem to like so much. And maybe I'll try that with my second batch of these. For now, I want it simple until I'll nail down the look that I want. And I can play with that going forward. So I'm going to do that to all of these models. I'm so close to the end of this build. And as I've talked about a little bit already, I'm not a huge fan of this double gray. Not that I don't like the concept, it's just that the grays are too similar. And I was kind of willing to let it go. But I started painting these guys, and okay, so yeah, there's some sloppiness there on the drying of the wash, but that isn't my main issue. I kind of want to direct your attention to this. So this is that shield drone. This is the top part of this support doohickey, and on these two models, the difference between the two grays, or at least the lack of difference between these two grays, is really, well, it's stark, right? The lack of difference is stark. They're really, really similar, and I'm thinking about what it's going to look like when I have, some mechs or whatever, and I don't know if I like the way this is going. I like the idea of two grays, but I want them to be a bit more distinct than this. I mean, you can tell a difference from close up, but when you back off a bit, like when you do here, you really can't tell. So I'm going to do something I'm not a fan of doing, but I think it has to happen. Is I'm going to repaint that secondary gray, and I'm going to repaint it in a way that when I use the wash, it will show up as a different color gray, which means using white. I'm going to do a white glaze over these areas that used to be light gray. And so when I apply the wash over this, now I'm going to have a very light gray. At least it'll read like a very light gray, which is the whole idea. Now, this step may not have been necessary if I painted a different way. So if I was the kind of person who doesn't do washes over like large swaths of the model, then I could probably avoid this step. Also, I could have just used, like whites to highlight, and that would have helped a bit, probably actually helped quite a bit. But it's not the kind of painter I am, right? I'm the quick and easy, decent results with, kind of a low skill level. And so both of those approaches wouldn't really work for me, at least not long term. I wouldn't be able to do a bunch of models with that approach. If I took the highlighting approach, then I'd have a ton of models to highlight, which is not, when I think about things that sound like fun, that's just not, it's not anywhere on that list, and the other approach where I don't use any washes, right? I just lay down the light gray and no wash over it. That could probably work, except that then for, it's less obvious for these drones, but on the armor pieces for the troops, there's a lot of little lines on the armor that would just not show up. I'd have to go back over those with like a panel liner, or do that trick where you kind of put some water in those crevices and then touch a brush to the crevice and let the darker paint kind of seep into that crevice through capillary action. And so that could work, but it's an inherently messy process, and I'm not great at that. Also, those little markings on the armor, they're really, really small. So you could try it, right? You could try both that, capillary action trick, or you can go in with panel liner, but it will be forever, and with how unsteady my hand is, the results are not going to be very good. So I'm left with adapting the paints I use for the techniques that I also use. In this case, I bump up the whiteness of the paint that I'm using so that it can accommodate my technique of using the dark wash over it. So let's see how this looks. I'm going to hit all of these models, and then I'm going to hit the troops. Once it dries, I'm going to go over it with a wash and see what that looks like, to see if I like those results any better. If I don't like them any better, I have choices to make, but let's cross that bridge when we get to it. I am having a heck of a time with these Tau. I've started a little bit of the detailing process, but I'm still working on this secondary gray, and I just don't like it. So I kind of went back and repainted everything with white, and then I added some watered down dark tone over it to make it gray, right? If you remember, I tried using a lighter gray, and then I went over it with a wash, and it was too similar to the primary gray. And so now that I've done this, it's not as similar, but it doesn't read like gray. It looks like dirty white to me, which isn't really what I was going for, although maybe that's what I'm going to go with. I don't know. This painting scheme has given me some trouble, and it's clear I'm going to have to keep working on it. Not in this build, but maybe in subsequent builds. What I have been doing then is I went ahead and just added some details. Like I've added this this kind of metallic color. It's a mixture of silver and bronze. I was gonna do just like a gold with a silver highlight to make it kind of soften it up, but I thought I'd mix up kind of a unique color, and I think it looks okay. Once it dried, I added some of that dark tone to define the icon that's kind of etched in there. And when I did that, I realized that it's upside down. So if you look here, the little ball in the icon is facing downwards, and on this guy, where it's static, right? It's set in place. The little ball is facing up, and so that's just my lack of knowledge of Tau. I'm going to end up having to pop these shields, these pauldrons off, and glue them on again in the correct orientation, which doesn't look like it's going to be a lot of fun. But you do what you have to do. And so right now, I'm adding little details like these emissive lights. So wherever there's like an indicator or some kind of like a glowy button, I'm adding a color to it that's different from everything else. So I've went with a very light green. In this case, I went with snake scales, and so I wanted it to be different from everything else, and I think that accomplishes the goal here. But as per usual, I'm not going to leave it there. I'm going to go over it with a little bit of green tone to make it more emissive. Right now, it's just green, And so this isn't a particularly hard thing to do. You just have to be a little careful. You gotta go over it like that. And thankfully, I had already prepped these by adding a white undercoat. And I had made them originally yellow, and I didn't like the way it looked, so I'm kind of going over each of these with a little bit of green. But this isn't the only place where I'm going to do that. There's a couple of other spots where there's buttons that kind of look like they might be, you know, LED buttons. So on this very same backpack, there's a couple of buttons over here. I'll make some of those green. A couple of them I'll add a little bit of red. Just to, I don't know, indicate something interesting is happening. There's going to be a couple of other similar buttons, sometimes on the greaves of the armor. Not every one of these guys has the same greaves, but where there's a button there, I'll undercoat it in white, and then I'll add a color. I've already decided to go with this yellow for like the rangefinder on the rifles. I'll probably go over that with a red tone just to kind of give it a glowy effect. I also did add the pouches. I've glued those on, and I really like the way those look. The magazines look a little drab. I could go in there and do something else to them, but I don't know. I think I'm done being creative with this project. It's taking a lot longer than it should have. And it's clear I have some things to work out. So I'm going to leave well enough alone with these. I'm going to just, you know, fancy these up a little bit with some emissive lights, and I'll fix the pauldrons. And that should be about that. I will do two other things, obviously, once I'm done with these little details. I'm going to give them a coat of flat varnish to protect the paint, but also I'm going to do something a little different, something I haven't done before. I've been toying with this idea, but I haven't done it yet, and I saw something from Eons of Battle. It's in their one of their videos that is designed to help. So it's like a community critique. Basically, if you're a Patreon member, Jay and Nick will spend some time talking about some of the models that you've painted, and they'll give you some constructive criticism. And one of the things that they mentioned, it wasn't for any of mine, but they did mention that it would be cool to add a gloss varnish to certain elements of the model. And I thought that was a great idea. I've been toying with that, but I haven't done it yet. And now is the time to do that. I think. Yeah, the other end of that rangefinder is it's this really small detail you don't want to get wrong, but I got it. I'm going to add that to everything here. And so for all of these emissives, once I've gone over it with the matte or the flat varnish, once that dries, I'm going to hit these emissive buttons with a little bit of gloss. Some gloss finish. I have a gloss varnish. I think it's going to work. So after I add the flat varnish, because I want almost all of the model to be flat, I'll go in there and touch those emissive buttons with a gloss varnish to kind of give it a sheen on top of on top of the flat. I'm hoping just that one little sheen will make the difference that I'm looking for. I don't know for a fact that it'll work, but I'm going to give it a shot. I think it'll be a nice little touch, especially since so much of this project has left something to be desired for me. It's not bad. It's just not what I wanted it to look like. So I want to give myself something to smile about where these models are concerned. And I think that might do the trick. I should point out that I'm using a distinctly human color selection to these emissive buttons. I know for a fact, well, no, not for a fact. I know that's a silly choice, right? What I mean by that is, for humans, generally speaking, green means good, red means bad. This is not true across all cultures, but it's true among many cultures, enough that I feel comfortable using that bias. But there's no reason to believe that aliens that involved in a different biosphere, in a different solar system, would have the same biases. I think that the choice of red and green has a lot more to do with human and mammalian evolution and the kind of light that we get from our sun. Presumably, Tau evolved on a completely different, kind of a place, and so their biases should be different, or at least they're likely to be different. I'm going to ignore all that because my audience isn't aliens unless there's something I don't know. My audience is humans, and so for humans, generally red means bad, green means good, so I'm going to go with the same kind of information biases for my guys. But I figured I'd explain that because it's the kind of thing that bugs me when I read or watch science fiction. It doesn't break my immersion or suspension of disbelief, but it tickles it, for sure. Okay, so these ended up looking a little better than I was thinking. I think the addition of the bases and the grass tufts kind of brought them back over that edge for me. I'm still nowhere near satisfied, but you know what? For a first attempt, I will take it. These are painted up, they're based, and they've got a little bit of flat varnish over them to help them survive the rigors of sitting in my box for the next 20 years. Really rigorous. But before I did that, what I wanted to do was I wanted to try something I haven't done before. So if you see, let me adjust my lighting here. If you see stuff like on this drone, there's a little red light there, right? It's supposed to be emissive, and it's the same kind of thing with a couple of parts on this model. There's that little LED indicator on the power pack or the backpack. Some of these, maybe like that controller, there's a little globe thing that probably lights up. Some of the gauntlets, I don't know if you can tell, but some of those gauntlets have little buttons on them that I've added lighting to. So what I'd like to do is gloss them up a little bit. So over the flat varnish, I'm going to add just a touch of this stuff. It's gloss varnish, just to those things that I want, to be shiny, essentially. I don't know if this is going to work, but this is the last thing I want to add to this model before I consider them done. I don't know what it's going to look like, but if you never try it, you never know, right? Here they are, my finished Fire Warriors for my new Tau army. Well, probably not army, but, collection. I don't know, I think I learned a few things about my painting technique as they apply to this type of model. So it's clearly need to refine how I do things, adapt my technique for these guys. Primarily, I think, so the Tau armor is a lot harder to paint than I thought. And what I mean by that is, my technique is usually, I'll put on the primer, I'll put on a glaze base coat, and then I'll go in and do the layering over that. And I rely on washes to bring out some of those details. And I was thinking that the washes would be a good way of bringing out those little fine lines on the armor plates. There's these little kind of segments on each of these major things. And I've come to realize that those lines, they're really, really fine. They're really thin. So I think I need fewer coats in order to get the wash to do what I want it to do on those pieces. I don't know that for a fact, but I suspect that's what's happening. And so I'm going to have to do things a bit differently. So the next time I paint infantry for the Tau, I'm going to have to, make sure that I have fewer coats. Maybe it'll just be the prime coat, wash those, and then paint the base glaze, the different color on the other parts of the armor. I don't know for a fact that that's going to work, but I'm going to give it a shot. So that's the plan. I'm otherwise okay with the color selection. I like this idea of the gray and blue. It brings to mind, I don't know, UN peacekeeping forces. Maybe not the most flattering of comparisons, but there it is. And so this kit also has a nice amount of details to paint. It's not an overwhelming amount, but the arms, the gauntlets, a lot of these are different, or these are at least a couple of different varieties of these. So you'll get these with like that little computer screen on it. Then you have like this one with just a single little green dot that you can barely see. There's one with 2 dots, so that's nice. The backpacks also give you a good opportunity to add a bit of color if you want it. So I went ahead and I did that LED kind of power indicator thing. I made sure it was a nice bright color. There's 2 little buttons. Some of them they're both green. Some of them they're red and green. Just kind of depends on the story I wanted to tell. Like, oh, this one sustained some damage, or maybe it's low on ammo, and some of the other ones are green across the board. And the technique of using the bright color and then adding the appropriate wash tone over it, it really does make it look like it's supposed to light up. I do like that. It's essentially how you approach painting plasma cannons, those kind of the lights on those, but applied to different things. And I added that little bit of gloss varnish over the top of those. And it's really subtle, but you can kind of tell that it's shinier than other things. And so I did the same thing to the face mask. I added a red and an orange kind of glowy eye to them. I wanted to use different colors to kind of get away from the usual red. On the scope, you might be able to tell that it's a little glossy. So there's not a ton of those elements here, but they're here, and so if you take a moment to look at them, and I think it's probably more evident with something like this because it's a little bigger. You can see that shine coming off of that red, right? And so it looks more like a lens to me than just plain red, no matter how bright it is. And you could always just give it the impression of the lens effect by adding a little bit of kind of a white highlight and then maybe like a black dot or a white reflection dot. Absolutely, you could do those things, but it takes a bit more time and it takes a bit more skill, and that's not what I'm about. The easy mode is what I'm about, and I think the gloss varnish is a really good way of picking out some of those details on the model as, hey, these are lights. Obviously, you could probably use that in other places. Like I toyed around with the idea of making the helmets glossy. I thought that might be pretty cool, but baby steps. I could have done better with the sergeants or whatever they're called in the Tau language, that little communicator or radar indicator, whatever that is. I did some freehanding on that. It didn't come out as nice as I was hoping, but It's also glossy, so you can tell it's a lit up screen. On the bases, I did something a little different. I mixed my own texture paint. Basically, just took some cheap. Well, I'll show you. I took some cheap acrylic paint from your local hobby store, mixed it up with a bunch of sand, and then I added some gravel. I also added, my first batch, I added some little chunks of cork. That didn't look as good. It was too thick. So I redid it with just the sand and the gravel. And when I first laid it down, I didn't think it was going to work very well. But now as I look at it, it did a good job. And it's stuck on there pretty well. It's stuck on there, in fact, better than the model that just kind of came apart. That is another thing that I should point out about these models. The contact points for the feet are really, really small. These are models you may end up having to pin to their bases, or just be content with gluing them over and over and over again. I didn't show off these guys too much. These are the shield drones. I could have made a couple of different versions of it. This is the support platform, which I think looks pretty cool, but I could have done a better job, I think. I do like the glowing effect that I added. It's a little bit more evident here. So I did, kind of the base coat for that was black. I added a kind of a white, not highlight, I went over it with some white dry brush. Once that dried up, I went with a custom glaze or a custom wash that I made. It was a very, very light blue, and I let that settle over the white dry brush, and it kind of gave me that glowy effect I was looking for. At least it looks like that's what I was going for. It's not, not quite like a blue glowy LEDs in there, but it's a way of representing it in paint without actual LEDs. I think that's a neat approach. I'm going to try to refine a bit more. And obviously I'm pretty unhappy with the secondary gray. I'm going to have to, play around with that some more. The whole idea behind these things is to learn how to make something new, and these, for as much as they're plastic models and they're made by the same company and for the same game system, yada yada yada, each faction, I'm coming to feel, it has its own little quirks and foibles, and I think that's probably not intentional, but it makes the building and painting process more interesting. It's not as samey as it could be otherwise. So I'm pretty excited. I'm looking forward to working on some of these other kits. I'm really looking forward to trying my hand at one of those fancy looking mechs. Hopefully this paint scheme applied to those, they'll look a little better. So we'll see. So I hope this was, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was entertaining, or at least relaxing. Thank you for joining me. Next week, we'll have another project, building, painting, or magnetizing, and I hope you join me then. Until next time, please be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.